Ted,
Yes, David.
the Atlanta Braves moved in here, and the sports complexes going up around here being real impressive. And people ask, how did we get here? How did Cobb County become who it is? Who were the players and key decision points in the history of Cobb County that made the difference? As we know, a community faces decision can go one way or the other. It changes history, which way they go. So chat about that for us.
Well, as it relates to the Atlanta Braves coming to Cobb County, you pretty much have to look at a 30-year history of Cobb County to understand how we got to the place where the Braves thought that that was the right decision to make. They didn't make that decision without incredibly thoughtful consideration. They were facing a traffic problem where people couldn't get to and from the games. In all honesty, they were facing a public safety issue where if you were parked in some of the parking lots late at night back to your car, that people felt insecure. And they also were very, very eager to have an environment where before and after the game, the people who went to the games had something to do, that they could get something to eat before the game, and then they for young people, they could have something to do after the game. So to address the issue of how Cobb got to that point, you've got to look really at 30 years of leadership. The reason I'm picking 30 years is because the Cumberland CID was formed 30 years ago, specifically to make infrastructure investments, mobility investments, transportation investments under the leadership of John Williams, one of the greatest Cobb County citizens ever. We were hitchhiking off of leadership from people like Ernest Barrett, who was the chairman of our county commission, and others who had created an environment where Cobb was a great place for development. We were starting to see office buildings and residential properties, particularly post properties, coming in. And we realized that the history of Atlanta was that downtown, everybody went north to Buckhead, and then everybody came north to Galleria. And if we weren't careful, everybody would go north to Town Center. So the CID was formed to begin to make an investment in infrastructure so that we could preserve real estate values and keep people in Cumberland CID. And under the leadership of people like John Williams and Roy Barnes, Johnny Isaacson, that CID was able to be formed. So if you'll allow me to fast forward, we made $500 million in transportation improvements within the Cumberland CID over that 27-year period. And as I said, the Braves were facing a transportation issue, a traffic issue. I have been a season ticket holder since 1989, and it would take me 2 hours to get to the game, 3-hour game, 2 hours to get home. So you spent more time driving to and from the game than you did at the game. And a lot of people were refusing to do that. The Braves realized that. So they looked at the property that they wound up buying in Cobb County, which was at Circle 75. And they realized that at Turner Field they had basically one way in and out, maybe two. And that with what we had invested in Cobb County and in the Cumberland CID, there were 14 ways in and out of the property that they had acquired. And people say, did you make transportation improvements to support the Braves? And the answer is no. We made transportation improvements that allowed the Braves to make the decision to be in Cobb County. They've made about a $1.5 billion investment in Cobb. The Cumberland CID has contributed $15 million to that, which is a drop in the bucket, but it's a lot for us. And it's turning out to be an extraordinary success story for Cobb County.
Ted, let me ask you a question. There are points in time in history where a significant event happens that takes you one way or the other. You make a decision to do this. 20 years later, you're so glad you made that decision. The Braves were one of those events. There were some for it and some against it. As a visionary yourself, how will people in the future look at this decision in your estimation?
Well, The complaint about the Braves process has been that it was conducted confidentially, that it was not put to referendums, that it was not in the public eye. The Braves had made it very clear to Cobb County that if it required a referendum, if it required being in public, that was never going to happen. So you can complain about the way the process was conducted. But besides that, I can't think of any way to criticize what the Braves have done. They've lived up to everything they said they were going to do. They, in a very short period of time, they've become the largest property tax payer in Cobb County. That's going to continue to evolve. They're going to make more and more announcements. They're going to make more and more investment. The property values are going to continue to increase. It's an unbelievably exciting environment down there. And one of the things that we've learned, the Braves play at home 81 games a year, which is approximately 2 months. So there's 10 months when there's no game. And the Battery is drawing lots and lots of people, particularly millennials. So the Battery is busy around the clock, 365 days a year. It's an extraordinary success story.
Would you think there's been things that occurred in Cobb County since the Braves decision that could have been impacted by that decision, like Atlanta United, which is now the home of the professional soccer team? Do you think the Atlanta Braves decision and moving forward that decision could have been a part of that decision?
Well, David, I think there's a synergy there. It is very, very hard any time to suggest that anything caused Arthur Blank to do anything. But you and I have talked at length about the sports corridor. If you drive north on I-75, you come into Cobb County, the first thing you get to is the Braves Stadium. Continue north, you get to the United property and all the investments that Arthur Blank is making in that area. You continue north, and the Kennesaw State is establishing a huge bulkhead as far as sports venues are concerned. And then you continue north from there, and you get to Lake Point, which is probably going to attract more aspiring Major League Baseball players who are teenagers than any place in the country. So there's a synergy associated with all of that probably wouldn't have happened without the Braves. But on the other hand, Atlanta United was already moving forward in the Franklin Road corridor before we had perfected the Braves conversation. And Kennesaw State was also, beginning to develop a football team. And then, of course, Earl Earhart and a lot of other people were working very hard on Lake Point. So I think a lot of people saw the same thing. And what the Braves did sort of put a seal of approval on it. And it was easier to get investors, and it was, there was just more momentum behind it. And we're going to see, in terms of tourism in Cobb County, these sports venues are going to drive a huge economic aspect to our community over the coming years. So yeah, I think they were a catalyst to it. I don't think that you can credit it to the Braves unilaterally.
Okay. Take a drink of water. Deep
Okay.
breath.
Thank you.
Doing good. Want to go back to the beginning. Ernest Barrett, who many people say helped us make the right decisions. He made some lonely decisions. And we want to take it from Ernest Barrett days to other people, like you said there, the Matt Hendersons, how they came into play, the Conley Ingrams, the people that had to make some of those hard decisions, the John Williams. I want you to talk about those people now that were critical to the success we have now, and any stories, Dad, any good stories that people would laugh their head off about. The funnier, the better. This thing won't be produced until later this year, and so you'll have every opportunity to come back and say, I don't want that story in there. So right now, let's start Ernest Barrett and Ernest Barrett Ford.
Well, for people who understand Cobb County today, we have 5 county commissioners, 1 elected chairman, and then 4 district commissioners. When Ernest Barrett was the chairman of the county commission, it was a single commissioner system. So he was the county commissioner for Cobb County. And he recognized that infrastructure was the key to economic development going forward. And he made the decision to invest county funds in running water and sewer infrastructure all the way out to West Cobb. And politically, it was an extremely dangerous. There were a lot of people that opposed that. A lot of people thought that, we're not going to see economic development in West Cobb for years. We're wasting money. What the heck are we doing? It turned out to be a decision that opened up opportunities for residential development in West Cobb and throughout the county. So in my opinion, Ernest Barrett was one of the real heroes of laying the groundwork, literally laying the infrastructure for economic development. You mentioned Conley Ingram, who was a chair of the chamber and a real community citizen, still is to this day. He and a delegation met with Tom Moreland at the DOT years ago to discuss the route for the construction of I-75 before I-75 North was built. And they recommended the location where I-75 wound up getting built. And that created the intersection of I-75 and 285, where we've really seen the focus of development and economic development in our CID and in the community for the last 40 years. And Conley, he chaired the chamber and has really been a great mentor to so many of us. Just a wonderful human being, and still is to this day. John Williams, it's virtually impossible. We wouldn't have a convention center if it weren't for John Williams. We wouldn't have a performing arts center if it weren't for John Williams. We would not have the kind of quality residential communities that we have in Cobb County, where John has established the gold standard with Post Properties in the 70s. He created the Cumberland Community Improvement District. He came up with the original idea for transportation splosts, which also ultimately resulted in education splosts. He had the idea for CCT, Cobb Community Transit. These were all brainchildren of John Williams. And he had the ability not only to come up with an idea, but to have such passion behind it that people would follow him and engage and help him to accomplish it. And everything that I just mentioned are all results of the passion and leadership that John Williams represented. And I will tell you a story. I was in the middle 80s. Trammell Crow Company left Don Childress left Trammell Crow Company. And I went with Don. He formed a company called Childress Klein Properties. And I was the guy running the Galleria. And after we had split with Trammell Crow Company, Don came to me and said, I got good news and bad news. The good news is you're responsible for the Galleria. The bad news is you got to do something with the Galleria Mall, which was a disaster. We had built a boutique mall. The idea was that Cumberland Mall across the street would be our anchor. That doesn't work. And we were in debt and it wasn't working. So I tried to find anchor tenants. I tried to do all kinds of stuff. And then I heard a presentation where Laventhal and Horvath, this was Thea Powell, did a presentation to the Cobb Chamber. Laventhal and Horvath had done a study that said we can justify we need a convention center in Cobb County. So I got a copy of the study and memorized it and met with an architect, got a model built for building a convention center, tearing down the Galleria Mall and building a convention center. I presented it to Mac Henderson, who was county manager at the time, and some others, and everybody that I met with said, I presented it to Phil Sanders, who at the time was the president of the chamber, and everybody said, if you want to get this done, you need to go meet with John Williams, which I was terrified to do, So I took my model, I built a model that was, heavy, carried it around in my trunk, and I went to his office, and I carried it into his office, and I put it on the table, and I said, John, we need to build this convention center. And he said, Absolutely. I mean, he was so smart. He just got it. And he said, so how are we going to do it? And I said, well, we have the Coliseum and Exhibit Hall Authority. They're dormant. But that entity has the right to build this convention center. And he said, well, in that case, I need to be the chairman of that thing. So the next time I knew anything about it, he was chairman of the Coliseum and Exhibit Hall Authority, and he led the charge to buy the property from us and fund the development. And he was such an extraordinary developer, and quality was always his. He said, this place is going to be exquisite, and go there now. We opened it in 1994. Go there now. It is still exquisite. Marble floors, great skylights. It's magnificent. And that was John's signature on it. But he made it happen. Absolutely made it happen as chairman of the Coliseum Exhibit Hall Authority. And that's the way he was. So, I'll take credit for the idea, which was created in desperation, but I could never have implemented it. Once John took the ball and ran with it, we were good to go.
On the CID itself, I've often heard that he was the architect of the CID, and now they're 18, 19 in Atlanta?
27.
Okay, let's talk just a little bit about why he came up with that idea and how John makes things happen.
Well, he and Earl Smith and some others had done essentially a link trip, although it wasn't called that then, to Dallas. And in Dallas, they had something called BIDs, Business Improvement Districts. They also had SPLOSTs, and they also had public transportation, buses. So a lot of us go on these trips to other cities, and we hear about good ideas, and we come back and we just go back to work. John came back to Atlanta and said, in Cobb County, we need public transportation, we need a mechanism to do SPLOST, and we need to form a CID. And he did. He went to then State Representative Johnny Isaacson, and then State Senator Roy Barnes, and he said, I want to create a CID in Cobb County. Well, you couldn't do that in Georgia. It's against the law. So he asked those two guys and their staffs, so what do we need to do? And he was told, well, we'd have to pass a constitutional amendment to enable the creation of CIDs in Georgia. A lesser man would have said, a constitutional amendment? You got to be kidding me. I think I'll just go back to my office. He said, okay, let's do it. So in 1985, they put it on the ballot, the constitutional amendment, to enable the creation of CIDs. It passed statewide. Roy Barnes introduced the legislation in the Senate. Johnny Isaacson introduced the legislation in the House. It crossed over, they cooperated, they advocated for it, and it passed. So now we had enabling legislation that required a local act with a county. So he went to the county and he said, okay, well, we need to draft this local act. So they did that. And then he took all the people who worked for Post and got them out getting consent forms signed. And we got all the consent forms signed, and on May 1, 1988, through John's leadership, we became the first CID in the state of Georgia, and he was its first chairman. A year later, I went on the board. I became vice chairman immediately, and after 15 years, he decided to be done with it, and he resigned, and I became the chairman. But that CID would not have happened were it not for John. And if imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, there are now 27 CIDs in the state. People began to realize that in order to be competitive, you had to have a CID in a commercial district. So Town Center was the second one. There's one in Marietta now, Perimeter Center, North Fulton, Midtown, Downtown, Buckhead. Everybody's got a CID, and they make about a $50 million annual investment in infrastructure within the region, and it makes a huge, huge difference. And that would not have happened if it weren't for the leadership of Earl Smith and John Williams and a few other people.
Okay. We're right now planning to put you right before the John Williams stuff. So let's talk about John Williams, the person. You know him as well as anybody other than his family. So, through those relationships, you know what makes them tick. Some people do it for ego. Everybody likes to be recognized. Some people do it for financial gain. Some do it because it's the right thing to do. Some do it for all those reasons. What makes John tick? Why and how did he have the courage to do the things that he did?
Well, gosh, John Williams. One, he didn't think of it as courage. It was, this needs to be done, and I'm the one to do it. He founded Post, didn't have an office. His first office was the International House of Pancakes. And he would have meetings at the table, and he would have back-to-back meetings, but they'd make him buy breakfast every time. They wouldn't let him just use the booth. And he would eat pigs in a blanket, and he would meet with people. And he was proposing Post Properties. He had a vision for Post Properties, and there was no reason to believe that made any sense whatsoever. But John was, it's such a cliche, but John was a visionary. He could see it. He could see where it was going to go. And he also had a very strong belief that I think came out of his own being, that it was important, if the community was benefiting you, that you give back to your community. It was enlightened self-interest. It was what goes around comes around. But at the same time, he believed that if the community was taking care of you, that you had an obligation to take care of the community. And he had enormous passion for that. And he brought the same level of vision and leadership to his community involvement that he did to his company. So certainly he was motivated by money. He made a lot of money, and made a lot of money for a lot of other people. He was the most loyal person I've ever met, and I experienced that. He was my friend and my mentor for 35 years. But he expected that level of loyalty in return. And if you didn't provide that level of loyalty, he would discard you immediately. So, my relationship with John and many others was, hey, Ted, I need you to do this. Absolutely, John, I will. What do you want me to do? And that was there's a lot of people that will say the same thing, and it always paid off. He never asked you to do anything that was going to be to your detriment. You would get to participate in something that would be to your advantage. When I became the partner at the Galleria in 1988, I had researched it, and John was the guy in Cobb County. So I got an appointment, and I went to him and I said, John, I want to be involved in the community, and someday I'd like to chair the Cobb Chamber. And he said, okay, you're on the list. This is a true story. And that was 88. 1994, I was chairman of the Cobb Chamber of Commerce. And I couldn't have done that without John Williams. He looked out for me. He put in the right words. He helped me. So that's the kind of thing that created the kind of loyalty. But, the record will never show the commitments that he's made to this community. He provided free of charge the original landscaping for the square in Marietta. He founded the Give Our Schools a Hand program, the handprints in the concrete on the square in Marietta. He chaired the Metro Chamber when they asked him to. He did the MATI study, the Metropolitan Atlanta Transportation Initiative, which resulted in Governor Roy Barnes creating a GRTA. He founded the CID. He built the convention center. He was deeply involved. He gave millions to the construction of the Performing Arts Center. He was involved in politics at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level. And he made careers for people, both at Post. He did an interview with Maria Saporta one time, and she said, what's the secret to your success? And he said, you could drop me in Times Square with $10, and in a year I'd be a millionaire. So when he left Post, he formed two people. He and Lenny Silverstein formed PAC, Preferred Apartment Communities. Two people. That was 6 years ago. Now it's one of the 5 largest real estate investment trusts in the nation. It's a $4 billion company. It's going to grow to $6 billion this year. And he created the company 6 years ago. Who else could do that? Who could see it? And who had the energy and the relationships and the intelligence? You know, one of the things that happens is that developers are lousy businessmen. And business people are lousy developers. It's not true of John. He was an extraordinary businessman with an extraordinary development acumen and a sense for deep community involvement. And the combination just created so many people who were trying to help him be successful. And he was successful over and over and over again.
Let's turn our attention to some other players that had significant roles. Go ahead and have some water.
Okay, thanks.
We'd like to talk about Earl Smith and Mac Henderson. They were players in the community back when things got going. We'll start with Mac Henderson. Tell us about Mac Henderson's involvement in the community and why he was so important.
Well, Mac, as it relates to the Cobb Chamber of Commerce, and as it relates to the Cobb community, he worked for Bell South, and his role was liaison to the community. So that got him involved in the Chamber of Commerce Board, which at the time was the preeminent gathering of business people to try to make things happen in Cobb County. And Mac was very much a part of that. And as he grew up, he became candidate for and ultimately the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce, which in 1984. And halfway through 1984, he had a heart attack. And John was the incoming chairman. So John took over and chaired it for the rest of 84, and then all of 85. And when Mac recovered, John asked Mac if Mac would be willing to serve as county manager for Cobb County. And Mac said absolutely. So when we were doing the convention center, the county manager was Mac Henderson. So Mac was a very important player in the community, first representing Bell South, then as chairman of the chamber, and then ultimately as county manager over an extended period of time. And that speaks to Williams' loyalty and their relationship. As it relates to Earl Smith, Earl was a leading businessman in the county, E. Smith Heating and Air. He was chairman of the county commission, great leader in that regard. During the time that he was chairman of the county commission, he did a lot of great things, got very involved with John Williams, and then he got beat. He lost that seat to a guy by the name of Phil Sechrist, who was a professor at Kennesaw State University. And so then Earl became, he didn't walk away from it. He became a very aggressive community citizen. He went on the Coliseum and Exhibit Hall Authority and later became chairman of it, was very instrumental in both the Convention Center as well as the Performing Arts Center. He was a participant in all sorts of, he invested in and renovated and recreated the Strand Theater on the square in Marietta and many, many other things. And during that entire time, he was an incredibly successful businessman with E. Smith Heating and Air. And he is still a vibrant community citizen to this day. So Earl, it's again, you're talking. Everybody you're asking about is a giant in Cobb County, and it's very tough to really speak coherently about what these people have meant to Cobb. But they were all dedicated. They were all committed. They were all leaders who were able to get people to go with them, and it's created an environment in Cobb that right now is just extraordinary. We're Cobb County wide, but particularly in the CID, we're experiencing explosive economic growth that's unprecedented in the history of Cobb County. $2.5 billion invested in the Cumberland CID over a 3-year period, and we're just coming to the end of that 3-year period. And of course, a huge part of that is the Braves. A huge part of that is public infrastructure, the managed lane system, but we've also had 7 new office buildings, several corporate headquarters, including Synovus and HD Supply and Genuine Parts, and of course we already have GE and Home Depot and now Comcast. We've also, over the last 3 years, constructed 7,000 residential units and almost 500,000 square feet of retail. So the growth that we're experiencing just within the CID, and there's similar examples in Town Center and elsewhere in Cobb County, all of this is a result of this investment that these people have made over the last 30 or 40 years to create an environment where Cobb has a AAA rating, one of very few, one of the best counties in which to live and work and play. I've been here since 1983, and Cobb has become an extraordinary environment.
So we've talked about men so far. We also have to recognize that Kennesaw State University has been a powerful part of Cobb's growth and probably will be in the future.
Absolutely.
And there's one person we know,
Betty Siegel,
who had the vision and the passion and the salesmanship capability to take a little community college and build it into what it is today. And just a little history about Southern Poly and the merger, because most people won't realize how that happened. But Betty Siegel first, and then the importance of Kennesaw State and how it merged into Southern Poly, or merged with Southern Poly.
Well, when I first got involved in Cobb County, it was Kennesaw State College. 5,000 students. Pardon me, but not highly regarded. Not a destination school for people with high SAT scores. And then they brought Betty in, and Betty Siegel, one of my heroes. There's never been, and there never will be, another Betty Siegel. She was flamboyant. She was brilliant. She was energetic. And it was her goal to convert Kennesaw State from Kennesaw State College to Kennesaw State University, to dramatically increase the size of the student body. But she was also a very aggressive supporter of the arts. We had a thing back then called Jubilee Cultural Alliance that she supported. My first speech in January as chairman of the chairman of the Cobb Chamber, I said that I wanted to create a committee to focus on the arts in Cobb County. And as soon as the meeting was over, she literally ran to the front of the room and said, I got to be on that committee. She was so wonderful.
Why did people want to line up behind her? I mean, here she is, the first female chairman of the chamber in a man's world, and people just wanted to follow her lead.
If you were with Betty, you were the most important person in the world. She would tell me how handsome I was, and she would say, as soon as you decide to run for governor, I'm going to support you. And you just felt like, gosh, all right, as long as I'm a friend with Betty Siegel, then I must be okay. And she made everybody feel that way. And she agreed, as you say. I mean, here we had a college president, a university president, who agreed to be chairman of the chamber, the business organization. And she did it beautifully. She was an unbelievable public speaker. I still quote her. It was like poetry when she spoke in public. Really, like you've seen it. She made all these connections, and she would quote writers and philosophers, and I still, she's the one that introduced me to the Aspen Grove analogy, which is fascinating. And she's the one that used to say, you know, if you see a turtle on top of a fence post that didn't get there by itself, she would quote Zell Miller on that. She was very close with Governor Miller. She was well connected. She was unbelievably energetic, and if you were in her presence, you wanted to be a part of what she was trying to accomplish. And if you look at it, Kennesaw is getting ready to be the largest university in Georgia. It is a university. They have an extraordinary economic development program. They've got their football team. All of the things that she envisioned, every single one of them has come true. And because of her leadership and her vision. I mean, she was just a powerhouse, and you know, she still is.
So, Southern Poly has a history, and you're one of the few people that can tell that history. Tell me a little history about how Southern Poly got formed, and then just a few words about the merger between it and Kennesaw State.
Well, I wasn't on the inside of that, but I'll tell you this: when I first got involved, we had Chattahoochee Tech and Southern Poly, and they were deemed to be trade schools, vocational schools, and the Chamber's education program was engaged with them, but not engaged with them at the level that they were with, for instance, with Kennesaw State. Then, help me, David, who was the lady that came in and ran?
Lisa Rossbacher.
Lisa Rossbacher. So the Lisa Rossbacher became involved, and the quality of the availability of education, and they began to offer a liberal arts curriculum, and but at the same time, it was a relatively small institution, and there was a tremendous amount of focus on the growth and increasing significance of Kennesaw State. And I think Kennesaw State saw the opportunity to take advantage of the assets, not only the educational assets, but also the liberal arts assets and the vocational assets, as well as the real estate assets. And join with that, even though they're 9 miles apart, join the two universities together, make them all part of the university system, and really derive unbelievable benefit from Southern Poly, as well as enhancing the mission of Kennesaw State. And you know, I don't think that was Betty's vision. I think that happened while Dan Papp was there. But it's turned out to be an unbelievably strong and positive relationship that bodes well for this community.
You can't talk about Cobb County without talking about Dobbins and Lockheed. Give us your brief history or understanding of history of how those two entities impacted this county.
Well, you've asked me to tell stories. The way that I wound up in Atlanta is that my father was a reservist who flew the C-130s out of Dobbins Air Force Base. So we were in Collier Hills, and to go out to Dobbins was a field trip. You know, you just drove and drove and drove. But my dad was an Air Force pilot, and he flew those airplanes. And we would go for Armed Forces Day, go through all the airplanes. So I've been aware of Dobbins Air Force Base since I was 5 years old. Later in my life, when I first was getting involved in the chamber, it was the first time I'd ever heard the term BRAC, Base Relocation,
Base Realignment
and Closure Act, and there was a threat that the federal government was going to start closing down various bases, and at the time we thought that we were going to compare unfavorably to Warner Robins because Sam Nunn was down there, and so the chamber put together, and you were involved in it, not as the chairman when you were still with Georgia Power. We put together a justification for keeping the Naval Reserve Base with it had multiple missions, and that was an important factor. And we were able to keep it open. It's still open to this day. And one of the things that we learned through the process was the extraordinary economic impact that Dobbins has on our community, the jobs, et cetera. Now add to that Lockheed is there. All right. Lockheed uses that runway. And Lockheed maintains all the C-5s in the world. And they manufacture C-130s, and they do at least part of the manufacturing for the F-22 process. And they employ a whole bunch of people.
You might also add that every F-22 flying in the world was built at Lockheed.
Yeah. And they are cool.
Well, we'll blend it in, but when you were talking about C-130s, everyone ever built in the world was built here.
Was built here.
You said that, exactly right. They built all of it, but just we'll walk back through while you're talking about its history. Every C-130, and they've been flying since the 50s.
Oh yeah.
Every C-130 around the world was built right here.
And maintained here.
Right, and every F-22 ever built. So
And the C-130, the most versatile cargo airplane ever built. It can land anywhere. It can take off from anywhere. Very reliable airplane, relatively easy to fly, propeller driven. They have delivered ordnance to every aspect of the world, and that airplane, like the DC-3, like the Goonie Bird, it's had an unbelievable shelf life. They're still making them today. It's still the best airplane for that purpose on the planet. The C-5 is just an extraordinary airplane. It's the largest airplane on the planet. You can put tanks in it. The whole nose comes up, and when they come in for a landing, they make an extraordinary sound. And that's a Dobbins product. And then the F-22 is the most sophisticated combat aircraft, fighter aircraft in the world. It can do things. It's stealth. It can go straight up. It can go straight down. It can do all kinds of things, and it's an amazing airplane. And all of those are built and maintained right here in Cobb County, and that's a huge benefit to our economic stability. And it's also, strangely enough, we have a program called Honorary Commanders, which is a specific program designed to create a relationship between the business community and the leadership at the Naval Air Base. And that program's been in place, 20 years? 27 years, and it has worked. There are so many relationships between the military folks and the the Lockheed executives and the leadership in our business community. And so the Chamber's relationship with the military complex, if you will, is fantastic. We helped, you were very involved in helping them with a commissary that serves their employees. We have done visitation through Honorary Commanders. They have, members of their leadership have served on our board. We've tried to help them with economic development as they respond to the changing environment. There's a very strong connection now between the military and the Lockheed folks. As a matter of fact, the year before I was chairman of the Chamber, which was 1993, the president of Lockheed was the chairman of the Chamber, Ken Canestra. So we really have created, and you've had an awful lot to do with this, we really created a marriage that exists to this day and is going to sustain, in a large part, this community. And I think that it'll also allow us to continue to prevail in future BRAC considerations, because it's become so much an important part of our community.
Okay, let's talk about a fun part. A lot of people don't realize this, but Six Flags.
Yeah.
How are you going to take?
We're good. I'm just making sure the sun is moving. I'm just making sure the light is still good, and I think we're okay.
Okay. Many people don't realize that Six Flags is in our community, in Cobb community, and has a long history. It is impossible, almost impossible, to find somebody here who hasn't had a brother, sister, aunt, uncle, child, grandchild that didn't at one point work here. talk a little bit about Six Flags.
Well, I think Six Flags is right now an evolving topic. Six Flags, I don't know how long it's been there, but for a long time, has been a vibrant member of our community. It's a cool place to go. Got some great rides, and I used to take my kids there when they were younger. So Six Flags is an important part of our community. But as you say, there is a certain amount of lack of awareness that it's actually in Cobb. It's way down there. What's happening now is that with the leadership of Six Flags, and frankly with the leadership of Lisa Cupid, who's the district commissioner for that area, and with the new transit plan, and with some investments that are being made in Cobb Link, and frankly, with an evolving relationship between Six Flags and the Braves, I think you're going to see more and more opportunity, for instance, to go to Six Flags in the morning with your kids, and then there'd be a shuttle that includes tickets that allows you to go to an afternoon game at the Braves Stadium, and then go back to your car, and there's going to be a lot of synergy that's created. One of the things that we've struggled with since I was chairman and before I was chairman, and I bet Bob Perlman talked some about this, was the fact that there's always been a belief that we weren't making the proper level of investment in South Cobb. And it wasn't the case, but nonetheless, there were some socioeconomic issues and other things that made it difficult to turn South Cobb into the Galleria, for instance. I think that's changing. I think that over the next 10 years, you're going to see South Cobb and Six Flags become a very, very important component of our community, and you're going to see extraordinary economic growth in that area. And I'm proud of that.
So, I don't know what you do. There's a guy on the board in the chamber who became the commissioner of industry, trade, and tourism that at one point ran Six Flags. Was he a player? I can't remember. He's on the board. He's the past chairman of the chamber. Don't know, do you? Don't remember? He was before you.
It's not Perlman.
No. He ran Six Flags. And
Spurgeon Richardson.
Right. Okay. So he was a part of history in Six Flags.
Well, he chaired the chamber.
Say the name for you.
Spurgeon Richardson, who was one of my mentors, ran Six Flags early in its life. He got very involved in the chamber, became a chamber chairman, and then he became the executive director of the Atlanta Tourism Board, which was involved in big-time projects downtown, like the Dome and et cetera. But Spurgeon was really one of the, funny, I haven't thought about Spurgeon recently, but...
Tell a story. I understand there's a lot of stories about him, if you think of one.
Well, he was all of these people you're mentioning, he was a very engaging guy. I don't know the history of how he came to be running Six Flags, because he was there when I got involved in the community. But he was not shy, and he expressed his opinion, and he was in a leadership role, and he was a tremendous advocate for Six Flags, for South Cobb, and then for the chamber, and then ultimately for tourism in downtown Atlanta. He was a great guy, I didn't get to know him as well as some of the other people you've asked me about. But when I got here, there was a guy named Jack Demarest, who was a banker, and Spurgeon, and Conley, and Johnny Isaacson, and John Williams, and Wyman Pilcher, and these were the people that I just thought, I just had stars in my eyes. These were the people that ran the place. These were the people who were involved in making our community happen, and I wanted to be one of them. And Spurgeon was in that group.
Let's talk about somebody you can't exclude when you talk about the history of Cobb County. It's United States Senator Johnny Isaacson. So let's talk about the role he played and any funny stories you've got about Senator Isaacson.
Well, I don't know that I have any funny stories about Johnny Isaacson. I'll think for a second.
Sure, you can't take all the time you want. We're just
But I'll tell you this: when I met Johnny, he was the president of Northside Realty. He was a businessman. He had chaired the chamber. He had been a House representative. Okay, I got a story I can tell you.
okay. Good. That's what tying on was many stories.
I was on my way home in my car. I guess this is 1996. And this is before cell phones. And I heard on the radio that Newt Gingrich had resigned the congressional seat for the 6th District. And I knew Newt. I considered him a friend. And I live in the 6th District. And while I was driving home, I thought, I might run for that seat. Newt would probably support me. And, it might be a cool thing to do. And I was in between jobs at the time. I had resigned. I had my own little consulting company. And so I was driving along kind of thinking, I might see if I can get elected to this. There was a special election that was only 6 weeks, So I got home, and I was contemplating becoming the 6th District congressman, and my phone rang. And I picked it up, and it was Johnny Isaacson. And he said, Ted, this is Johnny. I said, hey, Johnny, how are you? He said, I'm going to run for Newt's seat. And I'd like you to be my campaign manager. And I said, absolutely. End of my plans to run for Congress. So I supported Johnny. We raised $1 million in 4 weeks. There were 7 people in the race. He got 60% of the vote, and the other 6 got the other 40%. We all rode on a Delta jet to Washington, and he was sworn in as a congressman. And the best thing I ever did was chair his campaign and not try to mount my own. He's been a great servant to our community.
If you look at what role he played in us getting here today, of course he was the chairman of the chamber twice, I think. What was his role in having us get here today?
Well, in the first place, if you want to consider Johnny Isaacson's contributions, many of them were behind the scenes. He is not someone who seeks credit. Matter of fact, he doesn't seem to take himself seriously at all. If you go to Washington, senators walk around the halls and they've got a 10-person entourage. When Johnny walks around the halls, he just walks around the halls by himself. In Cobb County, you see him he's driving around. He's in the car. He's driving himself. He just doesn't take himself seriously. So much of it was behind the scenes. Having said that, as a congressman and then subsequently as a United States senator, he has had an uncanny ability to do what he thinks is right and to bring together partisan factions, not by selling out, but because people trust him. And I think in the environment that we're in now politically at the federal level, I think his wisdom, not just for the state of Georgia, but for the nation, is desperately needed because he is a clear thinker and he's not doing it for what's good for Johnny Isaacson. Right now he's doing it for what's good for the United States of America. So whether it was his business, his dad formed the business, he was unbelievably devoted to his father, who has since passed away, and to his family, his children and his wife Diane, and then Kevin and John, sons. And he's tireless. He never stops. And it's very difficult to say what an impact he's had on this community, but it's been extraordinary.
So,
I think Isaacson, if you ask Isaacson who his best friend ever was, he might just say John Williams,
Yeah.
and vice
That's
versa,
right.
and vice versa,
They were close and they supported each other
in every way.
in every way, and some of it's behind the scenes. Sometimes
A lot of it's behind the scenes.
probably having conversations to prop each other up because they were lonesome. They were one of the few Republicans anywhere in the state of Georgia.
Well, when Johnny ran for the House, there weren't any Republicans in Georgia. I mean, he blazed the trail. He was the first elected Republican in Georgia. That's obviously come a long way, but that's 40 years ago.
So Johnny Isaacson is always going to be known as that everyday kind of person. How was he as a leader of the chamber? What kind of leadership style did he demonstrate? Did he push? Did he pull? Was he quiet? He obviously played a role during those years. He chaired the chamber twice.
Well, I'll tell you what I know for an absolute fact. Johnny would sit in a meeting, even as chairman, and everybody would express their opinions and talk about it, and maybe the conversation would even become energized. And he would just sit there and not say a word. And after he concluded that the dialogue had gone on long enough, he'd say, well, let's do this. And he would say it, and everybody would go, well, yeah, let's do that. Right? He had this, and I learned that from him. It's hard for me to keep my mouth shut. But I learned to try to listen and form an opinion and then express that opinion, but not to just jump in at the front end of the meeting. I was not involved in the chamber when he was the chairman. He was later on my advisory group, my unofficial advisory group, and that's when I really got to know him. But he was extraordinarily well respected. The chamber did very well during that period of time. That was during the time that we were trying to build the building, and of course, the donation of the building and John Williams working with Johnny to raise the money. So there's a lot of very significant accomplishments for which he never took any credit. But I'll never forget, we had a meeting where Johnny did what I just said. At the end of the meeting, he summarized. And then we were going to meet with some politicians to state our claim. And somebody in the meeting, I can't remember who, we were 1 minute into the meeting. And they said, Johnny, you said something really good the other day. Go ahead and tell them what you said. And I was like, oh, God. And Johnny said, no, let me listen for a while and see whatever. And so he stuck to his guns. But I remember thinking, that's not the way Johnny plays it. And I was trying to learn from that. But as a businessman with Northside Realty, as a chamber executive or a chamber member, and then as an elected official at the state level, in Congress and at the United States Senate, he's extraordinary.
A lot of people don't know Newt Gingrich was from here. I mean, he represented part of this district. So
He was the District 6.
Right. Let's just get that on the record because people don't know. Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House.
When I was the incoming chairman of the Cobb Chamber of Commerce, which was in January of 1994, which was the first event ever held in the convention center, Newt had been, and he likes to be called Newt, so it's okay. Newt had been the Speaker of the House for a couple days. And I invited him to sit at my table. I was the incoming chairman. And he agreed. And he came, sat at my table. And Ken Canestra was there with his wife, and I was there with my wife. And I remember this. I don't know whether it's funny or not. But when I got to the podium to give my remarks as the incoming chairman, I said, in a minute we're going to hear from the Speaker of the House. I said, I'm not even the Speaker in my house. Got to laugh. But I just couldn't believe that, here I was, and Newt Gingrich was there to participate in opening the convention center and bringing me in as the new chairman. It was a very heady time, and he was like that. He would, you'd say Speaker Gingrich, and he'd say Newt. He just demanded that you call him Newt.
So I could go on and on about different kinds of people. Ted, who else if you write the history, and we're writing it right now, who else should we talk about over the last 30 years who helped guide us in the direction we are? We've covered most people. I haven't talked about a couple of folks I could have mentioned. There were some up in the North Cobb area. We haven't really talked about.
Otis Brumby. Do we have any thoughts about Otis Brumby? Or?
That's wonderful. Okay. It'll be your perspective, and that's what we'll do. Okay, so thank you, Ty. So here,
hang on, let me get plugged in.
Okay. Any active community like Cobb is going to have a media source, and they play a role, good or bad. They play a role in the community. Talk about Otis Brumby Jr., who was the owner and publisher of the Marietta Daily Journal. What we want is that there's always a tension between media and business. That's a healthy tension. So what do you see his role in the evolution of Cobb?
Well, it was significant. In the first place, Otis was a very, very smart guy. People may not know this. I think I have it right. He and Roy Barnes and a guy by the name of John Glover all graduated from the same law school class at University of Georgia. And so he was a member of the Bar Association. He was a very capable attorney. And he was the publisher. He was the heart of the Marietta Daily Journal. When he took that role over from his father, the center of Cobb County was the square in Marietta. And the voice of Marietta was the Marietta Daily Journal. And they occupied a very, very significant role in sort of defining the attitudes and opinions of the people who took the paper. And their circulation has never been huge. I think it's 18,000 or something. But the center of influence in Cobb County was on the square in Marietta, and they all read the paper. And Otis created that paper. So he saw himself as the watchdog for the spending of public funds. He was very much on the lookout for making sure that the public was aware of anything that they needed to know specifically as it related to the collecting and spending of tax dollars. But as Cobb County evolved, the center of Cobb County moved from the square to the intersection of I-75 and 285. And Otis had been the king of Cobb. And suddenly John Williams was the king of Cobb. And the center of business was in what is now the CID and the Chamber of Commerce. What Joe Mack Wilson, who was the mayor of Marietta, and Otis Brumby used to call those chamber folks. Remember that? That chamber crowd. And that created some hostility. He was sure we were up to no good. So I spent an awful lot of time trying to set the record clear with regard to concerns that the paper and Joe Kirby and Bill Kinney and Otis had with regard to what was going on in the Cumberland Gallery area. And so that was always tension. There was always a tension between what the MDJ was trying to accomplish and what the business community was trying to accomplish. And that continued until his death, and to a certain extent it continues to this day. His son now runs the organization, and occasionally we still get into those types of discussions, although not as much as we used to.
Let me stop so we'll go to another topic because I don't want to run out of time or film. You can't talk about the history. Oh, I think you captured. You can't talk about the history of Cobb County without going back to the Atlanta Olympics.
Oh,
Very few people can tell the story, the inside story of what happened. The resolution, its impact on losing venues, they're still remembered all over Metro Atlanta. So sort of start from scratch a little bit, if you will, go back. Tell us about that point in history of Cobb County.
Well, I had a speech that I used to give about John Sherholtz and Billy Payne as being two extraordinarily relentless advocates for a community, where John Sherholtz had built this dynasty, which was the Atlanta Braves, and Billy Payne, along with Andrew Young and others, but Billy Payne, through sheer force of will, had brought the Olympics to Georgia. Simultaneously, during that period, the county commission passed a resolution in which they opposed the gay lifestyle. So Cobb County was singled out as being the most homophobic county in America. And by that time, we had built the convention center to accommodate Olympic volleyball. We had ceiling heights in place. The torch was going to come through Cobb County, and we were still negotiating for some other venues like field hockey and some other things. And there was an organization based on that resolution formed that was called Olympics Out of Cobb. And we lost everything. They moved volleyball. The torch did not come through Cobb County. Restaurants were closing down. Businesses were boycotting Cobb County, moving out. It was a disastrous period for Cobb County. And I believe, here we are, 20 years later, that there's still a residual effect of that. And you can say, where did that resolution come from and why couldn't we fix it? Talk about behind the scenes. Isaacson was a huge helper working behind the scenes, but we would get right down to it, and our chairman at the time, Bill Byrne, would not agree to rescind the resolution. And we never did get it rescinded. So I think there's still people who think that this environment is a homophobic environment. I see no evidence of that. But that type of, in a competitive environment, that type of reputation sticks with you. And then during that time, we had several other things that went wrong. One was the Russian art exhibit. Do you remember that? We brought in a couple $1 million worth of Russian art that wasn't funded. And so after the fact, there was this huge fundraiser done to try to pay for something that had been a relatively colossal failure that was authored by Gordon Weissong, if you'll remember. I remember all this because I happened to be chairman at the time. And during that time, our president, who had been president of the chamber for 20 years, Phil Sanders, resigned, which created a real gap in our leadership because all of us had learned how to be chamber members from Phil, and all of a sudden he wasn't there. So it was a turbulent period, and the resolution made things extremely difficult.
So this may be an opinion only, not necessarily knowledge. Why did the commission feel compelled to pass this resolution?
My opinion. They were concerned about having to provide insurance benefits to gay partnerships. They thought that would be an expense that the county couldn't endure. That they felt that it was important for the insurance laws to apply to heterosexual partners, and they said all along that they weren't trying to interfere in people's personal lives. They just didn't want to provide county benefits to those partnerships. Whether that was absolutely true or not, I think there may have been some bias built in there, but I don't.
I think during that era, Tad, Cobb was a very conservative, therefore very spiritual. The church system was alive and growing and well, so I suspect, and you comment on this, that the Bible speaks to this issue, and given the fact that Cobb County is a very conservative county and a church-fearing county or whatever, that factored in to some degree on their decision.
Well, I can tell you this. I was chairman of the chamber, and we passed a resolution at the board level encouraging the county commission to rescind the resolution because it was bad for business. Very shortly, 2 hours later, I got a call from my minister who said, you're violating the scriptures. Not a conversation I ever wanted to have. And I said, well, I understand, and I've read the scriptures, but I'm the chairman of the business organization for Cobb County, and I'm telling you, this is hurting business. There's nothing wrong with abiding by the scriptures, but we don't have to wave the red flag in front of the bull. He said, well, you've done that, and you're violating the scriptures. And it took us a long time to resolve that. I think we did. But yes, I think you're right.
How are we doing with Shay?
We're okay, yeah.
I think you asked me for some names.
Yeah, sure.
Kessel Stelling, you need to talk to Kessel.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's hear about it.
He chaired the chamber twice and was president of the chamber for 10 months. This is maybe an odd thought, but remember Bernie Brown created Promina?
Mm-hmm.
The idea for this huge healthcare system that became Wellstar was the brainchild of a guy by the name of Bernie Brown, who is long gone. I don't know where he is now, but I was on the Promina board, and at the time he was really a force to be reckoned with. But certainly Kessel. He's relatively huge in terms of the commitment that he's made to Cobb County over the years, and he's just a great guy.
Tell me, say a few words about Conley Ingram. You mentioned him, but really didn't talk about Conley Ingram.
Well, several things. He was involved in the chamber as I was just getting involved in the chamber. So it was more a question of hero worship for me than it was a real relationship. But Conley had been, he was famous for being close friends with Jimmy Carter, and they were very close friends. And he was a judge in Cobb County and became a member of the Georgia Supreme Court. And in the midst of all of that, he chaired the Chamber of Commerce, which is an unusual approach for an attorney, typically, although we've had a few who've done that. What amazed me about him was his eloquence. When he spoke at a chamber meeting, he was funny, he was engaging, he was intelligent, ran the meeting with efficiency, and then we'd go to the board meeting. We have always done it that way. And then he'd run the meeting in accordance with Robert's Rules of Order. And I would just sit there and say, I want to be that guy. I want to be able to run a meeting this way. I want to be able to speak this way in public. And of course I didn't get there. He's still, I don't know how old he is, but still when he speaks in public, I'm just starry-eyed. He's so amazing.
Well, he was definitely a role model. What would you say his role had been in shaping who Cobb County is?
Well, he had a lot to do, as I think I mentioned, with where I-75 wound up being, which has been a huge aspect of the development of the Cobb community. I think he was, between his family and his law firm, and then ultimately becoming a judge, that he was pretty much respected across the board. And very often, if people were convening a meeting, they would try to get Conley to attend, to sort of be the voice of wisdom. And he would agree to do that. He was, like many of the people we've talked about, maybe all the people we've talked about, he was absolutely committed to investing in his community. His children were being raised in this community. He had been in this community all this time. He was just a great guy. He was the first chairman of the Georgian Club. He'd just do stuff like that.
I'll tell you a funny story, not funny, but just who commented. Johnny Isaacson and I had this discussion about recognizing Otis before he died, not wait till the funeral. He'd already been diagnosed.
Right.
And so, Johnny comes up with an idea that's worth implementing. So I went to the Merritt Aquinas Club, and I talked to them about doing this event. And I had to do it fairly short to keep it confidential. I mean, he's a newspaper guy and always digging in and stuff. So we actually started planning it about 2 weeks out. And Johnny agreed to come and be the speaker at Merritt Aquinas. And so obviously Big Otis was going to come, right, to hear Johnny. And so that's what was going on. Well, I started inviting a whole lot of people that weren't members of Merritt Aquinas, including his family, his entire family. And when we normally have 250, we had almost 400 people there, and still kept it secret. Got Sam Owens to speak, but I got Conley to speak. And here's the story of Conley. I called Conley on the cell phone. And I said, "Sir, what are you doing right now?" He said, "Well, I'm walking on the beach in Florida with my wife." And I said, "Well, this is now almost a week out." He said, I said, "Well, great." I said, "How long are you going to be there?" He said, "We're going to be down here a couple of weeks." I said, "Well, I won't bother you more. Thank you." He said, "Well, David, what did you want?" I said, "Well, I'm explaining what I was doing." He said, "I'll be there." And he packed up the stuff, came home, and prepared the most eloquent speech.
Of course.
He had, just like a judge would do at the end, he was the hit. And if there's anything Ty wish we'd done, I wish we'd videotaped him because he was so articulate. Sam was always good. Johnny was good. Conley Ingram, man, he hit it out of the ball.
Well, he's just like that.
Yeah.
Hearing him speak is an experience.
We're going to interview him. You'll be amazed that somebody his age is never slowed down in terms of his speaking ability. All right, we've been grilling you for over 2 hours. What else would you like to add that I haven't asked, or people who, one thing I'll throw out there that Ty and I will have to get to. We've been very fortunate, Cobb, never having any big racial issues. And I can talk about some of them the last 10 years because it's involved in it, but why do you think, now this is not film stuff, let's just think is, why do you think we didn't have racial issues? What do you think, what was the reason that we dodged having any of that going on? And maybe we did and I just didn't know about it.
This is not for the video?
Not for the record, right?
I think that the reason that we don't have transit is a racial issue. So I think that
I agree, by the way.
we have
What?
We don't have transit as a racial.
Right.
we have experienced racial issues in Cobb, but there are two things going on. One, we don't have many citizens. It's a predominantly white community, and that's evolved recently, but 20 years ago we were a predominantly white community. And two, we're very circumspect about what we say out loud.
By the way, would you be willing to say that on film?
Maybe not today.
No, not today. So I want you to think about it, because that's part of our history. I mean, people know why martyrs not have. There's a real history that people didn't talk about. It never got out in the public domain. But
I drive for Uber, and I tell people, they comment like, "There's no public transportation. There's no public transportation." And I say it's actually illegal to have MARTA in Cobb County, and they're genuinely surprised that that's actually a law that you can't have MARTA.
Well, it's not that it. Well, you're right. Yeah. You're right. Technically, it's a law. We have found a way. You sure this isn't?
The thing's close.
Closed off.
Okay. We have found a way, as we've been discussing, to alienate the gay community and the African American community in Cobb County. One of the reasons that we can't get any good restaurants in Cobb County is because the really good waiters are gay, and they won't work in Cobb County. And how long has it been since you had a black waiter? There are still people who will say we can't have MARTA in Cobb because they're going to steal our TVs and rape our wives and our daughters. And there are people who believe that. Okay, so we haven't had racial unrest like they've experienced in the city of Atlanta and elsewhere, all over the place. But it's been quiet. It's been under the covers. But I think we're still dealing with it to a certain extent today. I mean, I was in a meeting with Georgia Power, the day I saw you. Was that yesterday? Mm-hmm. My God, it seems like 2 years ago. And somebody said, "Why is the Georgia delegation opposed to transit?" And I said, "I don't know, but I think I do. I think I do. No, I think that bias is still there.
And it'll die away eventually. I've heard this phrase: "We don't want them."
We don't want them.
Come up here, and they never say African American or Hispanic.
No, it's the undesirable urban elements. It's like
Well, they're going to steal our TVs. Yeah. Although MARTA is an extraordinarily bad getaway vehicle. Once you've stolen a 55-inch TV.
Yeah.
But nonetheless,
2 pounds of cocaine.
I think that's there. And interestingly enough, what we're learning in Cobb County now is you got to call it transit. You can't get MARTA supported, but you can get transit supported. People are beginning to the traffic is doing them in. And the managed lanes, a lot of our legislative delegation believes that the managed lanes are going to solve the problem. And they're not. They're part of a solution that involves transit and managed lanes.
Do you know what the race is called, MARTA, what it stood for?
Moving Africans rapidly
Through Atlanta.
It's unfortunate, isn't it?
Here, I'm sure.
So,
Ted, I've worn you out. I want you to think, because we can come back to this again. This is not a one-time interview, but give us a lot to think about. I want to come back to that racial issue on a fresh day because we get a little bit different setting. And when I'm going, there's several African Americans I'm going to interview. What was the guy at Southern Poly for years? He became a preacher at Zion.
I don't know.
Don't know.
Now, we had a chairman of the chamber, Richard Holmes.
Oh, no, I worked for him.
I know. And he was African American.
The only African.
But he's the only one ever, right?
It is changing. If there's one thing I can say, my contribution is that issue. With NAACP as a vehicle.
Well, I don't disagree, and I think it's evolving. I've got a 28-year-old son and a 25-year-old son, and they don't see color at all. No. They don't care.
Yeah, and that's true.
I mean, they don't care, and I'm learning from them to not care. I've been asked over time, what if your son, wanted to date a black girl or marry a black girl? And I'd scratch my head, and I've learned now that that's what he wants to do. Have at it. It's none of my business.
And a statement of how things have changed. The leader of economic development for Cobb County, one of the leaders for the entire state of Georgia, is gay. Brooks Mathis.
And the community development guy, Dana. They're both gay.
And everybody knows it's well accepted, but
that bias
10 years ago wasn't.
Yeah, it wouldn't.
Well, I'll tell you, when Brooks came into my office, there was an article appeared in the Mirror today, the Journal, about something turning red. I forget what it was. And I said, Brooks, just come into the office. And he actually thought, because he now was openly gay, I was going to fire him. He actually thought that. And he came to my office, and when I told him, I'm here to support you. I have a younger brother that was gay, that died of AIDS. I said, I understand to some degree why you are where you are. And I got up and hugged him, and he just started crying. He thought I was going to fire him. That's where we were back in those days.
Well, when I really learned where I stood was when I was chairman of the ARC. Atlanta Regional Commission has a huge percentage of gay people working there. I don't know why, but they do. And I quickly learned that I just didn't care. And the board didn't care. And we had some real hicks on the board, guys from Douglas County and Henry County and Clayton County. I mean, my God. Nobody cared.
Yeah, I know.
Good question.
We're an evolving county, and people don't know it because of our reputation. Just like Birmingham has this reputation of water hoses, and it's just so far away. But once you get branded, it is hard to change. This has been the best interview so far.
Yeah, it's also looked great.
Yeah, it's
looked
going
really
to look great. So thank you.
Well, given who you've interviewed, I'll take that as a high compliment.